So how exactly does a major record label work? If I'm an artist and I want to sign with them, what would my deal look like? Or do I even want to deal with them? Wouldn't I just be throwing all my money down the drain? These are questions that musicians ask themselves all the time, but they can never find a straight answer. Well, if you haven't already scrolled to the next video because you decided you weren't going to take advice from some kid with no chin, then you might want to stick around. Well, before we get too far into the bulk of it, I want to go through a little bit of major label history with you. So between about the early 1980s and the year 2000, there were 6 major record companies that were known as the Big Six. And they were Warner Music Group, EMI, BMG, Sony Music, Universal Music Group, and Polygram. The Big Six, right? Unlike anything else in the music business, it was actually easy to understand. But of course, somebody had to toss into the dryer. First, Polygram was absorbed into UMG, then Sony and BMG merged to make Sony Music Entertainment, and in 2012, EMI's separate divisions were sold off to separate companies, namely Sony ATV Music Publishing, UMG, and Warner Music. Oh, and I almost forgot. May 2018 was the month that Sony completed the acquisition of EMI's music publishing to the tune of $2.3 billion, making Sony the largest music publisher in the world. But here's the good news out of all of it. Now we just have the big 3. You have Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Music Group. A lot easier to remember. Now all 3 of these major labels also have smaller subsidiary labels, and a lot of them. In fact, if you were to Google the amount of subsidiaries owned by major labels in the US, your jaw would unhinge like that movie The Taking of Deborah Logan. But to save you a lot of heartache, I'm just going to let you know that there's thousands out there, so don't waste your time trying to remember all of them. Just remember the big 3 and some of their more important subsidiaries. So let's talk about what it means when an artist signs to a major label. When an artist signs to a major label, that basically means they're taking their name and the rights to all their songs and giving them away. So you can think of it like the last example where one company is being absorbed by another, right? You are being absorbed by the record company. Now, obviously they don't own you. That's called slave labor. But that does mean, yes, if you make music under your own name, then you get signed to a record label and they decide to drop you, they can legally tell you you are not allowed to make music under your own name anymore. However, the upside to that is if they sign you on and they do like you, they will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, to make you the biggest star you have ever been in your life. Now, with all this information, we have to move on to the major departments of a record label. The first department is Artists and Repertoire, or A&R. These are the types of people that find talented bands and incentivize them to come to their label. Now, they used to go to a bunch of shows, and they still do nowadays, but now any band that's worth looking at has probably got a good online presence, so they also do it that way as well. It was also common back in the day to have these folks as producers who would come into the studio and help with the overall sound, help to pick tunes, help to pick musicians, but now producers are typically hired by the artists. The next department is the sales department, which oversees, well, sales. They make sure your physical records make it into the big retail stores and smaller record chains. Next, we have the promotion department, which helps to boost your numbers with major radio stations and also helps you get acquainted with the in-crowd of people who will be playing your music. After that, we have the marketing department, also known as ADs or artist developers. These people are essentially your promoters. They make sure that your brand is super consistent down to the very last touch. The production department just deals with the making of the physical CD. Then we have the product coordinators, otherwise known as the product management department. This makes sure that every single department is working in sync so you can get the best product possible out to your listeners. Also inside of that is the new media department, and they deal with any new way to get your music out there. When the new technology came, people were scared as hell, but the record companies paid people to be scared for them. Now for the last 3, you have the finance department, which essentially makes sure you get all your royalties, so don't piss them off. Next, you probably have an international department. As you can imagine, music business gets very tricky when it goes overseas. These people deal with Germany, Sweden, Canada, and a bunch of angry Italians that go like this all the time. But whether or not your company has less or more departments, the final one they will have is your legal team. These people make sure you don't end up in a cardboard box on the side of the highway in Red Hook. They also take care of the label's contracts, their licensing agreements, and any other distribution deals they might have. Now, I know that's a lot of information and a lot of departments. That's why to most musicians, signing with a major record label seems a lot like going to a casino wanting to make a small bet, but then finding out the minimum buy-in is like $400,000. So they decide to go the independent route. Now, we're going to cover that in the next video I put up, but for now, we're going to go on to the actual distribution of your physical CDs. Despite that the vast majority of records that are sold are digital now, each one of the 3 major companies still has their own distributor, aptly named Sony, Universal, and Warner has one called WEA. Distribution obviously comes with its share of variety, whether it be large retailers, smaller record stores, or actually licensing the pressing of the CD out to another company. But how does that affect you as an artist? Of course, you will garner royalties from all the records that are sent out, but there's just one problem. If the record company doesn't know how much they're going to sell, how much do they pay you up front? Yes, I suppose they could wait forever and a day until the sales dwindled, but they need to make money too. So essentially what they do is they give you a smaller percentage until the big retailers have decided how much they are actually going to keep. Now there are a lot of other ways to gain royalties. We're going to cover that in a different video, and I just gave you a bunch of information back there. So for now, we're going to move on to some frequently asked questions. So first question, how does the record deal actually work? Back in the days of rock and roll, the record company would take a larger percentage of the income that was solely generated from record sales. Now, every recording contract is pretty much what's known as a 360 deal. And that means instead of taking a larger percentage of just record sales, they're going to take a smaller percentage of everything, meaning they're going to take from merchandise, record sales, digital downloads, digital streams, touring, live appearances. So they're coming for your pockets. That is the majority of what happens nowadays. Every once in a while, you'll get some record deals that will just take from record sales plus one or two other income streams, but I'm going to cover that in a video that talks all about the types of record deals, so don't freak out on me. Excuse me, I have a question, but what is my record deal actually going to look like? Well, a standard record contract is essentially going to tell you your term, which is the length of time that you are exclusive to a record label. Now, they used to do it in terms of a number of years, but now the more popular thing is to do it in a number of album cycles. So you might be signed on for 1 to 2 to 3 albums. Now, this might not be the case with your contract just because they would typically, back in the day, hold on to artists a little bit longer, hoping that they do better down the line. But now, if your first album doesn't do so hot, they pretty much drop you. Right, okay, that all sounds well and good. That sounds well and good. But what about the money that I'm supposed to get to record? Well, the record company gives you what's called a fund, which is essentially a large sum of money that you have to give everybody who's involved in the recording process. And then if there's anything left over, you get to keep it. But of course, they want all that money back because they're like the mafia, except with worse taste in music. Now, I do want to touch on this while we are on the subject. Yes, that does mean that you will not see a whole lot of money coming into your personal account until you have recouped, which means you've made back all the money that the record company has given you thus far. So that's why for the first couple years of their career, new artists will not see a whole lot of money. So I'm going to make most of that money touring, right? Well, not exactly, because you're not going to see a whole lot of that money up front anyway because of the recouping part. But yes, once you are fully recouped, you will make most of your money touring. And that is pretty much all the knowledge you have up front of the major labels, so it just comes down to one question. Do you actually want to sign with them? Given all this information, is it worth your time to sign with a major label? And to me, it really comes down to 4 different criteria. The first one is whether or not you are of a pop affiliation of some kind. If you're doing pop music or country pop or rock pop, anything within that realm, then it's probably best to go with a major label. And that brings me to reason 2, which is the ability to maximize. If you're inside of a genre where you need the giant numbers, unless you're going the independent route and working your ass off, you are going to need the major label because they help you get that far, right? And the third reason is you get to license out a lot of your works to the other folks so you can just focus on doing the music, which is what you love to do. Now, again, that all rests on the fact that you are doing it inside of a realm where you will need a lot of time to work on those songs. The fourth reason is essentially because you get the opportunity. If a label comes to you and you have the opportunity and you feel like it's a good gamble, go for it. Other than that, it's your world and you have your own opinions and your own influence, so you do what feels best. And on top of that are the 3 reasons, at least my 3 reasons, you wouldn't want to sign with a major label. The first one is if you play a smaller genre. If you play jazz or some type of smaller funk and you don't need that scalability, then you might just want to go the independent route. The second reason is it might rocket you to superstardom being with a major label, but ultimately the numbers actually say you'll probably wind up losing your rights and your music. And the third reason is you have massive amounts of leverage against you. Think about it. You have a multi-billion-dollar company that wants all of the money they've given you back over a certain amount of time, and they will not take no for an answer. So you have to be very, very careful whichever way you go. Hey, did you like that last video? If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down there. Make sure you hit the notification bell along with it to get all the updates. It'll also let the little elves and robots at YouTube know that more people want to see content, which would be pretty great.